friend posted a video of me on his lap. My husband saw it, and when he came home. Sometimes I wonder if all marriages start with a sort of delusion, or like some kind of belief that love alone is enough to bridge the distance between two wildly different people. Back then, I thought what Josiah and I had was proof of that. We were nothing alike, and somehow we were great. Now, years later, I see it differently. The same passion that once made everything feel so alive started to burn a hole right through us. When I first met Josiah, I was drawn to how unlike me he was. He was steady where I was impulsive, observant while I tended to leap before thinking, just generally more reserved. I used to joke that he was like an anchor that kept me from floating off somewhere stupid, and then he'd roll his eyes and say I was the spark that kept his life from getting too dull. In the beginning, our differences worked for us. We complemented each other. We'd argue about everything, and it would always end with laughter or something that made our hearts race. The tension kind of excited me. Every disagreement felt like a chance to peel back another layer of us and really get to know each other. It worked for us. It worked for a long time. But then somewhere along the line, that playful tension started to lose its warmth. I don't even know when it began, but a few months back, I started noticing the shift. It wasn't sudden, like there wasn't a single fight or moment that marked the change, but little things started to feel a lot heavier. The teasing that used to make me laugh now had an edge to it, like there was something mean buried underneath. The jokes stopped feeling like affection and started feeling like low blows and backhanded compliments disguised as humor. The pauses after our arguments used to be brief, just long enough for one of us to crack and say something stupid to make the other laugh. But then suddenly, those pauses stretched into hours of silence. We'd both walk around the house pretending to be busy, waiting for the other to give in first. And the air between us was stiff and cold. Even our conversations changed. I used to love talking to him about everything, from what I was reading and things that happened at work, to the random thoughts that crossed my mind, and he used to listen to all of it and respond, offer his typical thoughtful, quiet perspective. Then I noticed that his replies started to feel distracted and clipped, almost like he was waiting for me to finish so he could get back to something more important. Sometimes he wouldn't even respond at all, and I'd just trail off mid-sentence because I noticed that he wasn't listening. The smallest things turned into battles. If I forgot to buy something from the grocery store, he'd sigh like it was the end of the world and proof that I couldn't handle basic responsibilities. If he came home and went straight to his laptop, I'd take it as him choosing work over me yet again, and I would go out of my way to ignore him as punishment. Neither of us ever said the words out loud, but they hung there in the air. We were both guilty of it, of constantly looking for evidence that the other person was the problem. I'd scroll through our text messages, rereading the curt ones he sent from work, and I would convince myself he didn't care anymore. He'd bring up things I said weeks ago, like he was keeping a mental list of my flaws and mistakes, ready to use them as ammunition. And in the beginning, I brushed it off. Couples fight, that was normal. You can't expect every day to feel like the honeymoon phase. I thought we were just working through this awkward stage in our relationship and that we'd eventually get over it. I thought it'd be something we'd laugh about later. I truly believed that. I thought we were just adjusting the way couples do when life starts feeling heavier than it used to. But the fights got louder and more intense. The kind where you say things you can't take back and then storm off, not even because you need space, but because you can't stand to be in the same room with them another second. The arguments stopped having a clear beginning or end. They just bled into everything else. One disagreement about dishes would turn into something about respect, or priorities, or about who cared more. By the time it was over, neither of us even remembered what started it. The worst part wasn't even the yelling, it was how often it happened. Once or twice a week at first, then almost every other day. Sometimes over real things, but mostly over nothing. Every little annoyance became proof that we were incompatible and we'd somehow tricked ourselves into believing it would work. Still, I tried to hold on. I didn't want to admit that something might be really wrong. I thought if we just waited it out, things would settle back into what they used to be. I clung to that hope like it could fix everything, even as things started to get worse. But then came the night of the fight that changed everything. Josiah and I had always been opposites, but our biggest difference, the one that kept surfacing, was how we approached life outside our home. He was a homebody through and through, but me? I needed noise. I liked being around people and music. Unlike him, parties didn't drain me. I craved that feeling of being alive and not stuck in routine. That was something he never quite understood. He used to tolerate it in the early years. Sometimes he'd even come with me, though he'd hover by the wall and nurse his drink while I danced and talked to everyone. Then we'd leave together. It wasn't always ideal, but it worked for us then. But as time went on, he stopped coming altogether. The few times I asked, he'd say something like, "Oh, you know that's not my scene," or tell me that he was too tired. So I would go alone. It didn't feel like a big deal then, but over time those separate nights began to pile up, and each one added a new layer of distance between us. The night of the big fight started like any other night. I was doing my makeup on the floor, and then I asked, as casually as I could, if he wanted to come to a friend's party with me. He was on the bed, already ready for bed, even though it wasn't that late. When he looked at me, it was with this weird expression. Not anger, but something close to disappointment. "Do you really need to go to another one?" he asked. His tone was extremely condescending. And his tone just pissed me off so much in that moment. So I said, "It's not another one." I sounded a lot more defensive than I wanted to. "It's just something small." He scoffed then, and the sound was so laced with contempt that my chest hurt. "It's never something small with you," he said. And then I could never forget what he said next. "We both know how this goes. You'll go party with your reckless friend, get wasted, and then I'll end up scraping you off the floor. Then you'll cry in the morning about how much you hate yourself for it. I'm tired of pretending it's normal." I froze, and for a second I didn't even know what to say. The words hit deeper than I wanted to admit. "You don't have to scrape me off the floor," I argued back. "You haven't even come out with me in months, so you wouldn't even know." My argument sounded weak to my own ears, and it made me feel even worse. And then he yelled back about how he wasn't coming because he didn't want to spend his night watching me make a fool of myself just so I could feel like I was still 22. That one stung, maybe because it was kind of true or maybe because of how he said it. I don't know, it just hurt. The only thing I could say back was that I didn't want to spend my nights watching him sulk in silence because he couldn't stand to see other people having fun. It escalated from there pretty fast, and every word we'd swallowed over the past few months came spilling out. He accused me of being irresponsible and immature. I threw back that he was controlling and judgmental, and too proud to admit that he was bitter. He said I only cared about attention, and I told him he only cared about being seen as better than everyone else. We were both yelling by then. And then after a while of back and forth, he said, "You know what? Go to your party. Have a great time." Then he got up and walked out. I knew he had gone to the guest room. It was what he did most times when we fought. There was nothing else I could do but sit there on the floor and cry. I felt small and alone, and it all hurt so much worse because I knew that Josiah meant every word. When I finally pulled myself together, it was pretty late, and I thought about texting my friend to say I wasn't coming. I thought about washing my face, going to bed, and maybe trying to talk to Josiah again in the morning when we'd both cooled off. But then I remembered how he'd stormed out like he couldn't wait to get away from me. And I could picture him in the guest room just laying there completely unfazed. Those thoughts made me feel bitter and petty. And I started to think that maybe I should go to the party just to spite him. If he thought I was some reckless, irresponsible woman who couldn't control herself, maybe I'd let him believe it. Maybe I'd be exactly what he said I was. And so I went. And it was the worst mistake I ever made. I didn't even plan to stay long. I told myself I'd just show up, have a drink or two, and leave before midnight. I needed a distraction, just something to shake off the sting of that fight. But then I got there, and it was not what I expected. It wasn't the small get-together I'd imagined when my friend Haley had invited me. It was a full-blown madhouse. There were people practically pouring out of the front door like something out of a college frat movie. I almost turned back, but then I thought about going home to Josiah and his smug morality. And I thought about how my sister had said something similar to Josiah's words once. She told me that now that I was married, I should probably slow down, that the party girl version of me wasn't wife material. At the time, I'd laughed it off, but sitting there in the car, her words came back to me. And I thought for a brief second that maybe they were both right. Maybe I should have stayed home, and I really was too much. But then another thought crept in, one that felt defiant and more myself. I thought, why shouldn't I have fun just because I'm married? I was tired of being made to feel like I had to trade joy for stability. I'd already given up so much of myself trying to fit into the version of woman Josiah seemed to want. So with that in mind, I got out of the car and joined the party. I found Haley pretty quickly, and she led me to a corner where a few familiar faces were already gathered, laughing and swaying to the music. Within minutes, someone pressed a cup into my hand, and I was drinking. I didn't even ask what was in it. For a while, it all worked to get my mind off of Josiah. I danced. I laughed. I let Haley pull me into photos I'd probably regret seeing in the morning. But even as I smiled and cheered, a part of me couldn't stop thinking about Josiah and about him alone in the guest room, or the sound of his voice when he called me irresponsible. No matter how many drinks I had, the thoughts stayed there in my head. And then I saw him. Corey. He was standing near the doorway, looking around like he was looking for someone. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. It had been years, long enough that I had to blink a few times just to be sure it was him. When he finally noticed me, his face broke into this surprised smile, and I didn't even think. I just crossed the room and threw my arms around him. It wasn't graceful, and I almost spilled my drink on his shirt, but I didn't care. I was tipsy and suddenly flooded with nostalgia. I told him that I couldn't believe he was here, and he said he was surprised to see me too. He hugged me back and then said, "It's been forever. It's good to see you." It really had been forever. We used to be inseparable. Back then, before Josiah, Corey, and I did everything together, we were super close friends. And then one night, after a few drinks, he'd told me he had feelings for me. I remember the way the air went out of the room when he said it, and then he leaned in and kissed me. It was quick, but it had felt wrong. Not like kissing a brother or anything, just weird. So I pulled away and told him I didn't feel the same. We both promised it wouldn't change anything, but of course it did. Things got awkward, conversations got shorter, and soon we just stopped talking. Not out of anger, but because it hurt too much for him to pretend nothing had happened. Then I met Josiah, and he became my best friend. So standing there then, seeing Corey smile at me like no time had passed, felt surreal. And he looked good, better than I remembered. He was bulky, and the beard he'd been trying to grow for so long had finally come in. I caught myself staring and quickly took another sip of my drink, pretending to be casual. We talked for a bit, small talk at first. The usual "how have you been?" and "what are you up to these days?" He told me he'd moved back to town a few months ago. I told him I was married now, though I didn't give him any details. It should have ended there. I should have stayed with Haley and the others. But when Corey asked if I wanted to sit down and talk properly somewhere quieter, I didn't even hesitate. We found a couch in the corner, but it was already crowded. There were people sitting on the arms and someone lying across the cushions. Corey looked at me, shrugged, and sat down anyway. He tugged my arm and then patted his lap. I should have said no or laughed it off, maybe make a joke about how I wasn't that drunk yet, but I didn't. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down. It was awkward and strange, and that made it easier to rationalize. It made it easier for me to pretend like we were just two friends trying to sit down and make the most out of an uncomfortable situation. We started talking again, and our faces were only inches apart. The music was loud, and there were so many people around. His presence felt grounding, like Josiah's always had. I was completely focused on Corey, and I listened to him talk about what his life was like in a different city. It honestly seemed innocent enough then, with the way we were just talking, but then my favorite song came on. The one I always had to dance to. So I laughed and started moving to the beat a little without thinking. Then he smiled at me and leaned in. His breath tickled my ear, and his lips brushed my neck when he said, "Go on, dance for me." The words made me shiver even though they shouldn't have. I knew how it sounded and what it meant, but I was drunk enough and angry enough to let it slide. So I danced. I let my hips sway to the beat on his lap, and I let myself take things further away from innocent. At first, it was just fun, a stupid, flirty moment between old friends. But then he placed his hands on my waist, and I didn't stop him. His fingers moved along my dress like he wanted to be touching my skin instead. When I saw the flash of a phone camera, I turned my head in surprise and saw that he was recording. I should have pushed it away and told him to stop, but again, I didn't. People recording during parties wasn't new or odd, so I didn't make a big deal out of it. Instead, I looked straight at it, smiled, and kept dancing. Corey's hands roamed a little more boldly eventually. They slid down to my thighs and my ass. It was inappropriate, but I was too drunk to care, and it felt too good to stop, both the music and his hands. All I could think was that I deserved this, and that after everything Josiah said, I deserved one night of fun, one night of not caring what anyone thought. So I kept dancing and let him keep his hands on me. If I'd known what that one stupid video would cost me, I would have slapped it out of his hands and walked straight out the door. But at the time, all I could think was how good it felt to be free and wanted again. For a while after that night, it was like something in me flipped. It wasn't like I never went out while I was with Josiah. I did. But I had to really limit myself and hold back when I did, because I didn't want him to think less of me. But after the fight and finding out that even with my restraint, he still thought less of me, I didn't care about holding back anymore. Things with Josiah were bad. The days that followed the fight were quiet and awful, like living with a stranger. So I started going out again. At first it was subtle, just a drink or two after work or a girls' night. Then it became more frequent. The weekend bled into weekdays, and then one night turned into 3, and soon I was back to being the woman I used to be before Josiah. When I was out, I didn't have to think about Josiah's coldness or what he thought of me. I didn't have to deal with his disapproval or judgment seeping into every conversation. Out there, I could just exist unapologetically. In the weeks after the fight, I'd come home smelling like alcohol and looking a mess. Sometimes Josiah would be waiting, sitting in the living room. He wouldn't say anything. He would just look at me with his usual condescension. I would glare back, and then we would go back to acting like the other didn't exist. It became a routine. Every night I went out, I knew I'd come home to silence and judgment, and that only made me want to go back out even more. The irony wasn't lost on me, because I was pushing further away from him, and yet a part of me was still waiting for him to say something, to stop me, but he never did. One Friday night, I actually thought about staying in. I was tired, both physically and emotionally. I'd been out almost every night that week, and my body was beginning to protest. I was thinking about what show to watch when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Corey. He asked if I wanted to go out for drinks, said it had been a while since we'd seen each other, and promised the night was on him. It wasn't anything elaborate, just a casual invitation. I hadn't seen Corey since that night at the party. We'd texted a few times, but it was nothing serious, and the thought of seeing him again sparked something in me. Curiosity, excitement, and a bit of nostalgia, or maybe just the comfort of being around someone who didn't look at me like I was a disappointment. So I said yes. The club was already packed when I got there. Corey found me before I even spotted him, and his hand landed on my waist as soon as he leaned in to greet me. From that moment, he didn't leave my side. As we moved through the crowd, his hand stayed on my lower back. It felt a bit possessive, and maybe that's what made it feel so dangerous. We got drinks, we danced. He made me laugh, and for the first time in weeks, I felt light. He didn't make me feel wrong for wanting to have fun. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes when I laughed too loud. He just let me be. And that was something Josiah hadn't done in a long time. I knew Corey shouldn't have been touching me the way he was. His hand brushed against my waist when he didn't need to, and his fingers lingered repeatedly. Each time I told myself I'd stop it, but I didn't, because in that moment I didn't want to. After a while, we found a booth and sat down to catch our breath, and we ordered another round of drinks. "You know," he said, taking a sip of his drink, "you're a way better dancer than you used to be." I remember laughing and rolling my eyes. I've always been a good dancer. I slapped his arm playfully and he laughed. Then, without thinking too much about it, I said, "Well, since we're giving compliments, you're a lot more handsome than you were." He chuckled, leaning closer. "Oh, so you think I'm handsome now?" I teased him a bit so it wouldn't go to his head, and he teased me right back. It was surprising just how easy it was for us to slip into our usual banter. And then suddenly he reached out, cupped my chin, and turned my face gently toward him. My breath caught in my throat, and the noise of the club seemed to fade. "I think you're beautiful," he said, and his was voiced low enough that only I could hear. "But that's not a surprise. You always were." It was too much, the softness in his tone and way he looked at me. That was when I realized that our faces were very close together, closer than they should have been. I knew what was coming, and I didn't stop it. When he kissed me, it was gentle at first, and then deeper and slower until we were making out in a dark booth. It wasn't wild or desperate like I thought it would be. It was slow and almost boring. Because even as I kissed him, my mind wasn't with him. It was with Josiah. I thought about how Josiah used to kiss me, and how his kisses were so much better than Corey's. Kissing Corey only reminded me of how far gone things had gotten between me and my husband, and how much I missed what we used to be. When we finally pulled apart, I made up some excuse I can't even remember, and rushed out of the club, but of course, he followed right after me. He grabbed my wrist and asked me what was wrong. I didn't know what to say, so I told him that I needed to leave. He didn't let me go that easily, though, and insisted that I tell him what was going on. "I just can't," I said. "I thought I could, but I can't." He frowned and said, "What do you mean?" That was when I looked down so I could avoid his eyes. "I'm sorry, Corey. I shouldn't have kissed you. There's nothing there for me. Not like that." He looked like I'd punched him, and then told me that I was doing it all over again, pushing him away when we got close. I tried to explain that it really wasn't like that, but then he demanded that I tell him the truth and asked if I really didn't feel anything for him. I told him that I cared for him, but I just really didn't see him like that, and that I thought I could try with him, but I just couldn't. He stepped closer to me and tried to touch me, but I stepped back. "You could just give it a chance. Don't shut me out again." It made me feel awful the way he was practically begging, but there was nothing I could do. "Corey, please." My voice cracked a little as I said it. "I can't do this. I shouldn't have come tonight." He sighed and looked away. It was obvious that he was angry. "Yeah, guess I should have known better." I felt guilty, but there wasn't much I could do, so I just apologized and told him I would see him later. Then I walked away and ordered a ride. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like being outside anymore. I didn't want another drink or want to dance. I just wanted to go home. And all I could think about was Josiah. I thought about how he always used to wait up for me, and wondered if he'd be waiting for me when I got home. And I thought about how much I'd missed him. Again, the irony wasn't lost on me, that it took kissing another man to make me realize how much I still wanted the one I already had. What I didn't realize then, though, was that the damage had already been done, because Corey wasn't the kind of person who let go easily, and I had just rejected him twice. That night when I got home, Josiah was already asleep, and it hurt so badly that I couldn't just crawl in next to him. So quietly, I left and went to bed in our room. By sunrise, I decided I was done avoiding all of it. Whatever awkwardness or anger lay between us, I wanted to fix it. So I got up early and made breakfast for him. Then I waited for him to wake up. When he walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, he looked surprised to see me there. But he sat down at the table with me. The silence was thick, but it wasn't entirely hostile. I tried to speak a few times, but stopped myself each time. Everything I wanted to say felt too heavy and complicated. I wanted to apologize for all of it, even for Corey, but the words stuck in my throat. Josiah must have noticed me fidgeting because he looked up from his plate, studied me for a moment, and said, "You okay?" Before I could respond, he looked at my hair and smiled, then said something like, "Did our eggs come from up there? Because it looks like a bird nested in there." For a second, I just stared at him. He was teasing me, but it had been so long since he's done that I was shocked. Then I laughed, a real laugh that completely caught me off guard. He laughed too, and just like that, the tension cracked. It wasn't gone entirely, but it was lighter. Over breakfast, we talked. Like really talked for the first time in a long while. I told him how I missed us, and how somewhere along the line, I started feeling like he didn't see me anymore. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he sighed and said he didn't mean to make me feel that way. He confessed that sometimes he felt like I constantly needed to be outside because I wanted to escape him and our marriage. That hurt to hear, mostly because it wasn't entirely wrong. But I shook my head and told him I wasn't trying to escape him. I was just trying to hold on to myself. He reached for my hand then and squeezed. Then maybe we both need to meet in the middle again. It was such a small thing, but it felt like hope. For the first time in a long time, we were looking at each other with zero animosity. I smiled, nodded, and promised to do better. He did the same. The next few days were good, really good. We talked more and spent more time together. He even suggested that we do a movie night, just like we used to when we were first dating. It felt like a step in the right direction, like maybe we could actually come back from all the bitterness that had crept in. So I left work early that Friday, excited to surprise him since we'd both been looking forward to it, and I'd even picked up his favorite snacks on my way home. But when I walked through the door, I instantly knew that something was off. The house was quiet, except for a faint sound coming from the living room. It was a song that I recognized instantly, but couldn't place right away. I called his name but got no answer, so I followed the sound. Josiah was sitting on the couch with his phone in his hand and his face looked pale. The music was louder then, and my stomach dropped when I realized why it sounded familiar. It wasn't just music, it was the song, the one playing at the party when I danced on Corey's lap. Josiah looked up at me. His eyes were full of disbelief and fury, the kind of hurt you can't talk your way out of. He set the phone down slowly and took a deep breath. "What the hell did I just watch?" he asked, and his voice was low and trembling in this dangerous way that told me yelling would have been easier to handle. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It felt like I was going to throw up. The only thing I could do was ask him how he'd even gotten the video. He stared at me like I'd just asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Corey sent it to me," he said flatly. "Posted it on Instagram first, though. He even tagged you. Then sent it directly to me with a message that said, 'Are you sure you can trust your wife?'" I stepped forward and tried to tell that it wasn't what it looked like, and it was taken weeks ago, but he cut me off. He told me that there was no way he could trust me, and that for all he knew, I had been all over Corey last night. He went on about how disgusting it was to see me like that, grinding on another man and looking right into the camera with a smile. I was already crying when I tried to tell him that it was just a drunken mistake, that we were messing around, and it didn't mean anything. I promised Josiah that I didn't sleep with him, but he just laughed and told me that my promises don't mean anything. He shook his head when he said, "You let another man touch you like that. You let him record it, and you let him humiliate me." I tried again to reach for him, to say anything that might make it make sense or get him to listen to me, but he pushed past me and headed for the door. I panicked and reached for him, but he pulled his arm back. I begged and told him we could try to fix it, but he didn't even turn back. He just walked away from me like I was nothing. And then he was gone. He was gone for 2 days. 2 whole days of silence so heavy it felt like it was pressing on my chest and making it hard to breathe. I called him over and over, sent text after text, but none of them went through. Or rather, they went through, but he didn't care enough to respond. His read receipts were off, and his phone went straight to voicemail every time I called. I thought about driving to his office or to his best friend's place, but the thought of showing up there and of letting anyone know that something had happened between us made me sick. I couldn't stand the idea of pitying looks or whispered judgment, so I stayed home. I was in a constant loop of panicking and then calling Josiah over and over knowing that he wouldn't respond. I didn't sleep much, and I barely ate. All I did was hope that he would respond or come home. I was constantly in the living room, sitting around and waiting for him to finally walk through the door, but there was nothing. When the second day rolled into the third, I had started to lose hope. I told myself maybe he'd never come back, and things between us were really just over. I thought that maybe I'd wake up one morning and realize that he'd already decided I wasn't worth forgiving. The thought made me nauseous, and I laid down on the couch to feel better. It was while I was there that I heard a knock on the door. For a second I thought it was Josiah, and then thought that there was no way it could be him. He never knocked. He has his own key, so there was no need to. Despite that, I rushed to the door and pulled it open anyway. I was surprised when I saw that it was Josiah behind the door, and even more surprised to find that wasn't alone. For a split second, I almost smiled at him just because of the sheer relief of knowing that he was okay and seeing him physically again. But then I really noticed the man beside him. I noticed how serious he looked in his intense suit, and I noticed the stack of papers he was holding. The nausea came flooding back in again, and it felt like all the air in me left my lungs. Josiah didn't look angry anymore, just tired in a way I'd never seen before. But ultimately his face was calm, and his voice even when he finally spoke. "I came to tell you that I want a divorce." I remember the way I just stood there, blinking at him. For a second I thought maybe I misheard, that maybe he'd said it as some kind of cruel joke or punishment, and that he didn't mean it. So I waited a bit, but he didn't smile or laugh. His face remained the same. He just told me that his lawyer would contact mine and that he didn't need to be there for the papers to be served, but he wanted to see my face when he told me that marrying me was a mistake and that it was over between us. The words hit harder than I could have imagined. I opened my mouth to say something, anything really, but no sound came out. But I didn't need to say anything because he just went on about how he should have known from the beginning that I could never settle down. I always needed something new to chase, some thrill and attention. He said that he kept hoping I would grow out of it, but there was no hope for that. It was just who I was, someone who was prone to getting bored and who was never satisfied. He told me that he just couldn't do it anymore, couldn't wait around for me to one day decide that he and our life together were enough for me. Then he said that he was tired of trying to live with and love someone who was so careless and immature that they would throw years together away over a night out. "I really thought I was enough for you," he said. "But I guess I wasn't. I hope the alcohol and the parties are enough to fill that hole in your heart, since I couldn't." That was the very last thing he said to me before he turned and walked away. It was only then that the man in the suit cleared his throat and handed me the papers. He then said a few things about official notice and response timelines, but his words barely registered. I just stood there frozen and watched Josiah walk down the driveway and to his car, not once looking back. When the lawyer, or whatever he was, finished speaking, he just walked away and left me standing there, staring after them as tears rolled down my face. Eventually I was able to look away and down at the files in my hand. They were actual divorce papers. Looking at the words was what made me finally realize, even after all that Josiah had said, that there was truly no coming back for us. It's been a week since then, and I haven't signed anything. I don't know if I can. Signing would feel too much like giving up and letting go of our marriage. I can't do it. I know it's hypocritical of me to hold on when I was the one who destroyed everything and chose partying over my own husband, but what other choice do I have? I love Josiah more than anything. I just wished I had realized that before I took his love and care for granted and ruined everything.